Para completion, a sentence is missing. The sentence is given to you at the beginning, then the paragraph is given. We'll read the missing sentence, read the paragraph. Wherever we find that there is some sort of a gap, we'll see if the sentence fits. Otherwise, we'll first finish reading the paragraph and try to fit in the sentence somewhere. What's the sentence given to us? In the early 18th century, newly enslaved people created an amalgam of their native West African languages and the French that colonists used to communicate on the Louisiana sugar and indigo plantations where they toiled. 18th century, newly enslaved people who became slaves newly, created an amalgam, a mixture of their native West African languages and the French. Colonists used French. The West African slaves, native West African languages were used by the slaves. So they mixed these two, okay, and used to communicate on the Louisiana sugar and indigo plantations where they toiled. So these slaves used a mixture of their native West African language and French. Where did they use it? On the plantations, okay, where they worked. All right, let's read the passage now. Question 22, that's the para completion question. Read the missing sentence first, read the paragraph, and then see where it fits. For that, first try to understand what the sentence is saying. As you read the paragraph, identify the tone and see the flow of thoughts, and then put the missing sentence in it. In the early 18th century, newly enslaved people who had become newly slaves, created an amalgam, created a mix of their West African, with their native West African language and French. They were from West Africa, so they had their native language. The French colonists who had enslaved them used French. Now, these slaves used a language which was a mix of their native language and French when they were working in the plantations. All right, let's read the passage. I hope I pronounced this right correctly. Cory-Venney originated in Louisiana, but in the early 1900s, it split over the border to eastern Texas, Watson's native state, and he grew up hearing elderly relatives exchange neighborhood news in the language. As they died, Watson, who's African American, realized that his ancestral language was dying with them. Okay, now, first, we're talking of this person, Watson, in his native place. He grew up hearing elderly relatives speaking in this language. All right, as they died, now this continuation is there. As these elderly relatives died, Watson realized that his ancestral language was dying with them. He began using his stage as a platform to revitalize this language that is deeply rooted in the transatlantic slave trade. He used the stage to revitalize this language. This language had its origins in the transatlantic slave trade. So the slave trade has been introduced here. Then put the missing sentence here. How did the language originate? In the early 18th century, newly enslaved people created an amalgam of their native West African languages and French used by the colonists as they toiled in the plantation. It is the first language all these Africans coming from different tribes and caste systems would speak when they were enslaved. This amalgam was the first language that the slaves would speak, said Watson. So the correct answer would, the sentence would fit beautifully in B. That amalgam that they created is the first language that these people would speak when they were enslaved. They had these pidgin languages that they would speak for a couple of generations, but it eventually became an organized language, which is Creole. Cory-Venney, whose name comes from the Creole pronunciation of the French verb courir, to go, and venir, to come. Perfect. So B is my answer. Option 2. All right.